So we're going to go ahead and get started. This is Introduction to SpyDir, a BurpSuite extension. Something I've been working on for a little while. It's up on GitHub for everybody's consumption. This presentation doesn't have any flashing lights or loud noises, so everybody will be glad that they drank as much as they did last night. So who am I? I'm a senior application security consultant with Invisium. Twitter handle, GitHub stuff. Wannabe coder. I majored in computer science when I went to college, and while I was there, I realized that I hate doing things multiple times over and over, right? Like busy work is the worst, right? So whenever I see myself doing something 3 times, I see what I can automate. And that's kind of where all of this came from. So who are you? The lovely audience. This is the target audience for this is going to be AppSec engineers or consultants that are doing hybrid assessments, developers that are inheriting legacy projects that they're just like overwhelmed with what they have to do, and QA, who are people that are going to be trying to find as much about the application as they can, make sure that they're exercising all endpoints appropriately, and also they can assist the security team by making sure that all of the authorization boundaries are actually verified before the security team actually gets there, which of course makes my job more difficult, but it makes my reporting much less difficult. So the problem statement. What do I do if I'm dynamically SpyDiring an application, right, through BurpSuite or using Zap, whatever I'm using, and I know that I'm not finding everything. I know there's more there, but I'm also running out of time. I'm going to automate, right? I'm going to use a tool to do this for me. So I'm just going to use like Dirbuster or the content discovery tool within BurpSuite Pro, right? And those are great tools, right? They're going to find some good stuff for you. But if you have the source code, there's a better way to do this, right? So another approach is to do, if you have source code and you're performing a hybrid assessment, which is having the dynamic environment and having the source code, and you have, of course, tons of information in that scenario. Sometimes too much information, but this is going to give you an opportunity to kind of get into the developer's head, right? You're going to be able to see what decisions they've made with regard to security considerations or decisions. You're going to be able to verify vulnerabilities as you find them in the dynamic environment. So if, let's say, you've been messing with the SQLi vulnerability, you're seeing a bunch of...
You got to talk to the mic more, dude.
Sorry. If you're seeing like a bunch of error messages come back as you throw a single tick in there, you can go to the source code and verify, okay, they aren't doing parameterized queries, I do have SQL injection, versus, oh, they are parameterizing queries, and they're just throwing an error message at me to confuse me, right? So you can quickly verify those sorts of things. So I have the source code, right? And let's imagine that we're on a project together, and it's an infinite abyss of seemingly forgotten classic ASP, right? You get this project directory, and immediately your soul just evaporates. So that was my life once. I got on this project, and the project director said, really, you only need to worry about this one directory. It's pretty much all there. So I go to the TFS location, I pull all the source down, and it's way more than just this one directory, right? So I run a quick like stats program to see what kind of files I've got in there, and I see well over 2,000 classic ASP files, and I'm like, we've got a week to do this. This is going to be bad. So how do I accommodate this? So I start dynamically SpyDiring the application. I only get like 200 endpoints. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't make sense, right? There's got to be more there. So how do I find what I'm missing? So the first idea was to automate using a command line Python script. It was super simple. Just basically took in a URL, a session identifier. It allowed me to pass all those requests through Burp, and it would just parse a directory for a .asp file. If it saw it, it would act as if it was a valid endpoint and request it. So it did the job, right? Treated every file in the directory as if it was a valid endpoint. It would record the HTTP response code whether it was a 200 or a 404. I could then determine if I needed to dig down a little deeper. But there was a little bit of overhead involved with it, right? So sessions tend to expire. That's one of the things they do. So as I was doing this, I realized that I was accidentally testing authorization boundaries. So there was a directory that said admin, and I was getting 200s back for all of those files as I directly browsed to them or directly requested them. So all right, that's kind of interesting. That's going to be something in the report a few hundred times over again. This gave me a good way to find static content, right? If it's a PHP, ASP application, they have .htmls or .js files in there. This gave me a good way to enumerate that content. So then I had kind of a second idea, right? There's more than just this static content. I know that, right? There's other projects that are going to be using dynamic URL creation. Maybe I can generalize this, make it more approachable, give it a better home through BurpSuite, and then add some of that functionality I know would be of value. So, introducing SpyDir, the BurpSuite extension. It's going to let us spy on some on directories for some sweet endpoints. Few things first. Requirements: you're going to need BurpSuite. Weird, I know. And you're going to require the standalone Jython 2.7 jar. So the goals of the project are to be approachable and available. We're going to do that through BurpSuite. Find content that the dynamic SpyDir may have missed. And that's going to include more than just that static content that we were talking about before. It's going to include some of those dynamic URLs, right? We're going to report that information back to the user so that they can make a decision whether or not they want to send that over to the SpyDir, the BurpSpyDir, or if they just want to maybe hold on to that information for a later date and time or do direct browsing themselves. And then finally, we're going to provide a mechanism for further generalization so that the net that SpyDir casts can grow wider and wider and wider over time, give us more projects that we can use it on. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do some good old-fashioned SpyDiring with Burp. This is easy mode. So we have the mini twit Flask application. We're just going to kind of click around, right? It will sign in with a super secure password of 1234. Go ahead and add this to the scope. Oops, already added. Nice. We'll unpause SpyDir. We'll let it do its thing. All right, we see it's made 22 requests. So we can go back to this, bring that over a little bit. We can see we've got a log and a public registration page, style CSS, things that we would kind of expect to see on a Twitter mockup, right? An add message. So we can kind of see that SpyDir, this is the value I've given it to say if you find a field you don't know what to do with, just throw a whole bunch of special characters at it. So we can kind of see that it's done that a few times. That's SpyDiring easy mode, right? So the question is, did we miss anything, right? So this is a really, really simple application. There's not a whole lot there. So we can now use SpyDir to look for static resources we may have missed. Then we're going to take a walk on the wild side and actually try to parse the Flask source code. And then finally, we can consume a text file that we've done previously to make sure that we're still seeing the same endpoints that we saw in a previous assessment. So, SpyDir's all the way over there. Interesting. So, we're going to add a source directory, right? We're going to go to the mini twit. We're going to add a string delimiter. This is going to be used to split the string so that it actually creates the URL appropriately. I happen to know the administrator of this application. It's me. So I know that he's hosting some JPEGs that he shouldn't be hosting on this application. So we're going to supply localhost for the URL, and we're just going to go ahead and parse directory. So we're going to see that it comes up with assuming protocol, default value of HTTP. That's because when I initially typed this, I didn't type HTTP. I didn't give it a protocol, so it's going to assume a default of HTTP. Then it's going to provide an example URL. So this is what may be a valid URL, right? And that's going to be determined by splitting that string delimiter. So if you wind up getting a weird example URL here, try messing with that string delimiter to make sure that you're appropriately creating that URL. It's told us that it found 4 files or endpoints to be requested, and it printed out some statistics for us in case we're interested in those things. And we can see here that there are 4 JPEGs in that directory. So if we go ahead and show all endpoints, we can in fact see that there are 4 endpoints there, and they're all JPEG. So if we were to copy and paste one of those into our application, in fact, we're going to find something that I 3D printed, or the admin 3D printed, rather. So we've found some static content that SpyDir didn't find because it wasn't ever linked within the application. So now let's do something a little more challenging. Let's look for endpoints within the source code itself. So we're going to specify a plugin location, and this is going to be, for me personally, under plugins in my SpyDir location. If you install this through the BApp store, it's going to be on Mac under .bapp in your home directory, and then there's going to be a hex value or hash that will contain it as well. Or you can just pull it down from GitHub and use that. So we're going to see that it loads Angular UI routing, a couple others, including a Flask bottle routes. So if we attempt to parse files for URL patterns with that selected, I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen. It's going to attempt to parse the files for URL patterns, and then it's going to give us another example URL. It's going to tell us that it found 12 endpoints to be requested, and it's going to give us those stats again. So I'm going to clear the screen again and show those endpoints. So those endpoints have some of the same things that we saw before, right? Public. This admin thing is probably just a test user. Then we have a 1234 admin hobbies 1234, kind of weird. A backdoor, super weird. And then a hex thing here, right? So let's say we copied this, pasted it in, we would find a secret page, right? So this is something that, again, wasn't linked. It looks like it was set up by Equifax. We have admin credentials.
When that happens. Right?
It's the worst. So next time I go for a credit report, they're going to deny me. So we found some things that weren't linked, but they were in the source code, right? So we can send those to SpyDir. It's going to say that the URL isn't in scope because I used localhost intentionally rather than 127.0.0.1 so that I could show this error message. So if you just click send to SpyDir again, you're confident that this is your actual endpoint, or this is your host. You can just click send to SpyDir again. It'll ask you to add it to the scope. You can click yes, and you'll see it send those to the SpyDir. And then they should appear under localhost, and we see them within our sitemap. So that is finding endpoints within the source code. We can also point the extension at a single text file. So this is useful if we've already done an assessment on a particular application and we know that there's endpoints there that we're going to be interested to see maybe they have fixed the auth boundary issues. We can go ahead and parse a single file to get those same endpoints. So if we go ahead and parse the directory, here I'll clear it and then parse it, make it a little easier. We're going to find that, again, it found 12 files to be requested. But this time, if we show the endpoints, we're going to see this weird PII 1234 because the admin was hosting a lot of stuff he shouldn't have been hosting. And I told him about it, and luckily he removed that endpoint. So that kind of shows the authorization boundary before and after. So those are kind of the three use cases that I've personally found valuable with this. You can also save and restore the configuration, and you can, it's kind of off the screen at the bottom here, select which plugins you actually want to run. So if you deselect some of these things, it'll disable them, or you can re-enable them, and it should say re-enable, yeah. So if you save the configuration, it's just going to save it within BurpSuite. If you then close, click restore, it'll populate what you were previously using. We found static resources that Dynamic SpyDir missed. We took a walk on the wild side with the source code, and we consumed a text file that we had previously enumerated, right? So, were those magical resources? Did they appear just because I willed them to appear? In fact, no. Technology doesn't generally work that way. We're going to talk about plugins. So the plugins for SpyDir are written in Python, and they allow the extension to parse source code line by line to find the endpoints. They're generally going to use a regex formula. So for Flask, bottle, it's going to be regex at route or app.route or bottle.route. For Spring MVC, it's going to be at request mapping. And you're just going to really apply that regex, see if it comes back, and if it does, you have a valid endpoint. There are going to be three functions that are necessary. A run function, which is going to take a list of file lines, apply that regex, and then identify an endpoint, then pass a list of endpoints back to SpyDir. It's going to have a get name that's just going to return a name, and a get extension that's going to return the expected extension that it'll run against. So we're going to take a deep dive, and we're going to look at some code. Specifically, we're going to look at the Flask bottle routes plugin, which is what we were actually using. So we're going to see that we have an extension, a get extension, a run function, and a get name function, just like we said. We can see that we have the app.route or bottle.route, or just looking for route, regex. So we have all the key components. But we've got a little bit something extra as well. We have this handle path vars function that's actually going to do a little bit more for us. So Flask can have dynamic URLs, and it can supply those get parameters through the angled brackets. So we have this path vars variable, or constant, that is looking for a angled bracket username angled bracket, and I'm going to say that it's of a type string. So when that actually parses and finds something in angled brackets, it's going to pass it to this handle path vars function, and it's going to say, all right, anything within those angled brackets, if I understand what variable type or variable name is associated with it, I'll append or I'll replace that variable with a given value that I, the tester, have given the source code. So in this case, we're replacing that username with admin. And this is going to be the value that's provided within the URL back to the BurpSuite. So we can kind of see that, if I flip back here, when we saw that /admin, in fact, we were looking for something that I had supplied.
Oh, sorry, just right on.
Okay, excellent. The before and after, right? So if I had not had that function, we would see that angled brackets username. With that function, we're going to see admin in the place of that username in angled brackets. So, updates in the works, more plugins. I write these as I have time and come across frameworks that I think will work with this. Everything technically should work with it because it's just regex, but things like Rails are Rails. If you have requests, if there's something that you're coming across that you're interested in seeing this work with, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, you're always welcome to write your own and make a pull request. It's really as easy as just run, get name, get extension. Most of my plugins are between 50 and 80 lines, and most of that content's really just in that run function, just making sure that I'm getting a valid endpoint. The last thing that I want to work on is a post request processor. So the BurpSuite takes a java.net URL, which is only a URL. You can't do posts there, right? So any post parameters are lost. So I'd like to write my own processor that can actually send those post parameters and then add the request and response to the sitemap. That way we're not just dealing with get parameters, because more often than not the posts are the fun stuff, right? So that's what I'm working on now. Hopefully I'll have that out in the near future. So if you have any feedback, feel free to shout it out. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, the newest version of this is up on my GitHub, which is there, and a slightly not so new version is on the BApp store. Awesome.